Hello, my name is Justin Bright. Welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career mode playthrough. And yeah, so last time we had some learning experiences with heat shields and more specifically that science return capsule and what it is and is not capable of. And we also had a couple telerockets just kind of explode on me, which is not super fun, but, you know, is what it is. It's all part of the actual career management gameplay that makes it not just a sandbox. And that's actually something I do appreciate, even though I complain about it also. Having that drive and having those constraints are what kind of keeps me moving forward, you know? It keeps me from just like, well, you could just build whatever you want and do whatever you want, and I guess you could follow history or not. It's not a big deal. But actually having the contracts and having the mission goals and the progression, it's all really important to my enjoyment of the game. So hope you guys enjoy that too. So anyways, let's get to it. All right, here on the pad, another Tela 1 rocket with the GeoWatcher-A satellite on board. So we are going to head up into a very basic circular orbit, and I will talk more about that on our way up. But make sure everything is, yep, everything looks good. So we are going to engage autopilot and ignition. And liftoff of the GeoWatcher-A satellite. So we are heading into a geostationary trajectory, which is kind of complicated when you are coming from a place as inclined as Cape Canaveral. So we are inclined about 28 or so degrees off of the equator. So we need to do something about that to get into this nice, perfectly circular orbit that is at 0 degree inclination. And step one on our path there is going to be just getting into a nice circular orbit. So not much more to say until we get there. This is once again using the latest and greatest technology that we have of the of my latest and greatest Tela 1 booster with the NA-5 engines, and their hopefully lower ignition rate. You see that our failures from before have got us down to just over 3% and just over or just under 5.5% on these, but the data at launch is still pretty darn low. Hopefully this doesn't fail so that we can actually, you know, get the data telemetry from a full burn, but yeah, we will see about that. I have had bad luck with these before. My luck is bound to change now, right guys? And here come the cutoff on our booster engines. 3, 2, 1. And they are away. Boop! That makes me giggle every time. Okay, so another 190 seconds to get this chonker into orbit. We are doing pretty well so far. There's only a little bit of margin, so hopefully there's actually no margin if there's any failure on this booster. So yeah, I guess we'll see when this gets up into orbit. All right, we are coming up on main engine cutoff. One more second, and there we go. We have a good orbit. Fabulous. So now we can stage off our booster. Let that head back down to Earth, and we have here, this is our GeoWatcher-A satellite, just this little probe up here, and we are using the full stack of what is basically the Atlas D, sort of, mostly. So the NA-5 engines that we just staged away are part of the Atlas D configuration of the early Atlas rockets, and this is using kind of the Able that never got used for this purpose, the AJ-10-142. But it does use the Altair upper stage to finish that off, and we did need to have all of these individual stages because we don't have restarts yet. We do have restarts now on the AJ-10 mid, but I'd already designed this, so we're going to go with this. So we now have a nice, lovely circular orbit. So we need to get the apogee up to the intended orbit, which is this exact number here. So 35 million meters with some extra numbers on the end there that I don't feel the need to read, but it's very precise because that is a measure of how fast it is going to be orbiting around Earth, such that it matches the rotation exactly. And so there's a very precise orbit that we need to be in. And so step one is to get out there, because there's 2 points on our orbit that it will meet. And you can actually use MacLeod functions to plan this out, because there are very specific times that we are going to be needing to make these burns. This is not something that I can kind of futz around with manually. So you see that the ascending node and the descending node tell us exactly where this intended orbit meets with the orbit that we are currently on. And so we are going to be at the ascending node. We are going to want to burn out so that it will push our apogee to the descending node of this orbit. And so that is the very next step. So what we are going to do is I am going to change the apogee at the equatorial ascending node. And the new apogee should be 35793 kilometers. 35793. That'll give us the first leg of our geostationary transfer orbit, burning from a low orbit up to geostationary height, ideally at a place where it could then burn into that orbit. We are going to plan to change our inclination after that because we are moving a lot slower, and it is going to cost us a lot less. It would cost us thousands and thousands more meters per second of delta V to change our inclination this low than it would doing it up there. So let's go ahead and create this node. You see that it's going to cost me 2,471 meters per second of delta V, and we have just a little bit more than that, which is perfect. And so just as I said, that's going to bring us into an orbit that just touches this descending node. It puts our apogee right there. It's not going to be quite, everything is going to be a little bit off, and that's why there's so much extra delta V in the uppermost stage. So we'll talk about that when we get to it. So there we go. That is our plan for how we are going to put this into our appropriate transfer orbit. So let's go ahead. We are all set, I think. So let's just go ahead and execute this next node. All right, and now it is time warping us to the burn time. And the lovely magic of MacLeod means it doesn't matter whether or not we have a connection at this point. Since we have entered in the telemetry at a time when we could make this burn, MacLeod will run it for us just fine. And we are ullaging up, and here we go. We got a good ignition on our AJ-10 142, so we are on our way up to geostationary altitude. All right, so we are getting close to our cutoff, and that should hopefully get us pretty darn close to exactly the right altitude. Okay, so we are a little bit off, but what I'm going to do here, I think, I'm going to abort this node. Actually, it's doing this automatically, so it might get us pretty close. Well, let's not plan for that. So anyways, I am going to abort node execution. We are going to point orbital retrograde, and I'm going to use our RCS to try to bring us to the exact height that we need, which is 35793.172. So this is a correction that I was going to have to make one way or the other. Okay, so that's close. That's closer anyways. Okay, so now that I actually have connection and sunlight, we are going to just go ahead and nudge this very carefully down as close to 35793 as I can get. There we go. So that is about as perfect as we are going to get from here. So that is what we are going to do. We are getting up to that point. And so our next maneuver is going to be, but before I do, let's make sure. I think I turned off the force on this, so fingers crossed that this will not throw off our orbit too much, but we are going to decouple. Yep, and no force whatsoever. That's perfect. And I've actually been advised that there is a sun reference that I could point towards. Forward towards the sun. Okay, that's sideways towards the sun. Not sure what forward you're talking about here. Maybe up? Okay, the enemy base is down. I mean, the sun is down. So yeah, that points us directly at the sun, which is just fantastic, and that is going to be how we are going to ride up. But unfortunately, that has also thrown us off whack of our intended orbit. So 35793 is what I'm looking for. There we go. So yeah, all that maneuvering around has thrown off our orbit, and we really do need to be that precise. So our next step, we can do this in, interestingly, using MacLeod, we can do this two-step thing in one step. So what we want to do is we want to change our inclination to 0 at the cheapest equatorial ascending node or descending node, which ideally is also our apogee. So we'll create that node, and there we go. That's going to cost us 784. We are also going to want to circularize at the next apogee, and we create that, and there we go. But unfortunately, that is 2 nodes. But using the maneuver node editor, you can merge nodes together using MacLeod. So if I merge them, there we go. That is 1 node that is going to cost us 1,842 meters per second of delta V that we will do at the apogee of this orbit, and should get us pretty darn close to a circular orbit with 0-degree inclination. And we are going to start that burn with the Altair upper stage, and then we are going to finish it using hydrazine RCS generic thrusters. All right, so once again, execute next node. All right, so I'm going to warp us up to the orbit before I tell it to begin the execution, so that we don't have to worry about the batteries like we do on the probe that we have left behind. I guess I didn't... Well, I thought I'd put that on... what do you call it? I thought I had set that up such that it was not going to bother me. Or I thought I was going to set it to debris on staging, but I guess I didn't. So I'm not sure why that is the case, but whatever, it's fine. So we are heading up. 1 hour, 30 minutes. Okay. 10 minutes remaining, so let us now go ahead and execute this node so that MacLeod can do it for us. All right, now that we are stable, it is going ahead and warping us up to the node, and we are going to be firing off this Altair, and this is actually the first Altair that I have fired, so fingers crossed. It's ullaging. I don't think it needed to ullage. I think that it thought that I was... Okay, I think that was a staging issue on my part with MacLeod. It was just going to try to circularize this burn using all of my RCS fuel first. So I have just staged manually, and we are burning the Altair for the first time. It is ignited properly, and I'm really happy about that. All right, so that gets us most of our Delta V expenditure completed. And once that burns out completely, I am going to stage that off, and we are going to finish this burn using the dual radial engines. Little shot for posterity there. All right, and so this is going to take 5 minutes or so. So let's just go ahead and time warp that to get the bulk of this done. There's going to be a lot of adjustment that needs to happen afterwards, but they're like really just teeny tiny adjustments that you do like once per orbit. You like spend half of a meter per second of delta V to make sure that you have the orbit as precise as you possibly can, because we want to have the orbital period to be at a very precise number, because that is going to match exactly what the orbital period is of, or not the orbital period, but the rotation speed of the Earth itself. So if your orbital period is slightly off, then you're going to precess slightly, which means you're going to wobble slightly in the sky instead of remaining in exactly the same fixed position, which is what we are intending to do. So the orbital period that we're looking for is 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds with a inclination of 0.0 and an eccentricity of 0.0, which I'm doubtful that we are going to have all of those things. But that's stuff that I think the contract is going to be a little bit lenient on us, at least hopefully. There we go. Burn complete. Fabulous. Let's see. Geostationary satellite. All right, we are already in the orbit that is requested. We are close enough, so I don't think I am going to go into all of the work of getting this into an absolutely pitch-perfect geostationary orbit. This is more of a test article, and we have 451 meters per second of delta V, all in hydrazine fuel and fine controls due to RCS thrusters. So I am we could get the orbit to be exactly perfect. And for my communications network, when I finally do a geostationary communications network, we will definitely do that. But on this one, I think I'm going to take the win and call it good. All right, success. The geostationary orbit is the most commonly used orbit for communication satellites and other observation satellites, so that is fabulous. I am going to turn down the thrust on my RCS thrusters. There we go. And we are going to point down towards the sun so that this will fix itself in a way that always has good solar coverage. All right, so it is now pointing directly into the sun, and that is fabulous. We can now turn this off. And I can turn off avionics just in case. It will always automatically shut down your deep space avionics when you unload the vehicle or if you're in time warp. But I don't see any reason to. Tempt fate. While we are up here, we also are finally going to finish the magnetic scan. So that is one of the few long-term science experiments that does not require some amount of eccentricity. We are technically in an Earth space high orbit because geostationary is just above that line, like by a couple tens of thousands of meters, like not very much, not much. And that is going to get us a little bit more science, which is lovely. So yeah, that is it for geostationary, and that is how you do that with limited number of ignitions. When we have more capable boosters that are able to do more ignitions, this is going to be an easier process, but this is how you do it with well, I'm using 1960 orbital rocketry technology now, but when I originally planned this mission, I think I was able to do it with 1958. All right, feeling pretty good about that last mission success, so let's go ahead and spend a couple more points. Let's say, sure, about that many. Seems good. But yeah, it's just a matter of continuing to crank these numbers up higher and higher as we progress in the space program, because the bigger, as we start unlocking bigger rockets, it's going to require more and more build points to keep the numbers somewhat reasonable. Because I remember the time that my Thor Able was taking something like 90 to 100 days per rocket. Now I have my Thor Ables down to about 40 days each, but my Tela rockets are taking about 90 days. And so when I move up to the next rocket size, which is going to be 350 tons, it's going to cost 250,000 too. Woof. Yeah, when we get that rolling, that's going to require even more build points to sustain. So, something to think about in the future. And the reason why we are just continuing to pump up these numbers, because we want to keep everything going faster and faster, because we are not at the end of the progression curve quite yet. We're pretty well caught up on... I'm pretty happy with the rate of our science. I'd like that to go a little bit faster, but I'm also not acquiring it fast enough, which is one of the reasons why I'm kind of keeping my eye on the interplanetary transfer windows, because those are going to be a massive source of science when we finally are capable of doing so. Ignition and liftoff on the Tyros 4 satellite, sending up yet another low-orbiting... Switch the roll. Sending up another low-orbiting weather satellite to finish out that constellation. We have a very pretty early morning launch over Cape Canaveral. Looks very nice. But yeah, so this should be a dead simple Man, that's really pretty. I'm just gonna sit here and marvel at the loveliness of Scatterer and all the visual effects mods that I have installed, because there's not really much else to talk about on this launch. Alright, that AJ-10-142 has fired up and we are circularizing this orbit, and that should be just fine. This was like I said, a fairly simple mission, where we are just putting up yet another Tyros satellite payload, weather satellite payload, that is going to get us closer to unlocking the upper tier of the weather satellite contracts, just like the NavSat ones are unlocking the upper tier of the nav satellite contracts. So just kind of taking another further step down those progression lines. And we are now checking for stable orbit. Fabulous. Alright, contract has been completed successfully and the satellite has been transferred back to the customer for just a paltry 12,000 or so funds, but the real benefit of this one was the 36,000 advance that they gave us. Alright, so I have launched an X-15 and forgotten to put the vertical stabilizer back on the bottom. I even had to go into the edit window and I just completely forgot to do it. So yeah, I guess we're going to see how well my balance job is on everything else except for that vertical stabilizer, because this is definitely going to pitch over quite a bit. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to go like straight up-ish. Not straight up, that's also not great. But we are doing an X-plane high contract. I'm trying to get to 155 kilometers, so let's see how well we do towards that. Alright, so I did most of that burn in time warp, and that actually seems like it worked out just fine. We're going to get to an apogee of 157 kilometers, and then the real dicey question is how well this comes back down. And we've crossed that 155 kilometer threshold, and we are now descending very, very rapidly. And as we come back in at the same 45-ish degree angle that we ascended from, we just have to hope that the materials will hold together like they have in the past. I'm fairly confident that this should be fine. The vertical stabilizer is mostly for just that, stabilization, so I'm not worried about, how to put it, I'm not as worried about the stabilization as I am in just how steep of the trajectory was, because I tried to angle up a little bit more firmly so that we would I would do more of my burn inside the atmosphere before it started pitching over. So that does make this a little bit more dangerous, but I'm pretty sure that Johnny Flores, jaunty man of danger, will be able to pull us out of the dive that we are about to be in. Angle this back towards our surface vector. Fly-by-wire is on. Alright, here we go. It's pulling us back to our prograde vector. I am holding straight, and I am pulling up to try to get out of this dive as soon as we bite into the atmosphere. There's that wobble as we get down to 30 kilometers. G-force is climbing. Do not touch the stick at this point. I said don't touch the stick, Johnny. Okay. Okay. G-force is still pretty high, and we need to pull up. We gotta pull up. There we go. Beautiful. That's not so bad. Alright, now we're just a little far off the coast, and that, wow, that was way more dangerous than I thought it was. Holy crap, okay. Yeah, so make sure you have your vertical stabilizer on so that you can have a more gentle slope. So yeah, this thing survives just fine, biting back into the atmosphere and surviving the reentry heating and all that, but the real danger is making sure you don't do anything to make it like flip out and destroy itself on the way down. Alright, so let's see how well we glide back home to base. We still have a little way to go, it looks like. But as it turns out, this X-15 that I've designed glides just fine, so we are going to have no trouble. We are a little bit south of the Space Center, and I am going to, just in case, I am going to plan to get over land before I make this turn, because this thing, like I said, has seems to glide really well and does not lose a ton of speed, but I don't know what will happen, like there may be a point where it just like stalls out completely and starts dropping like a stone, and I don't want to risk that. So here we are getting to be just over land, so we are now able to just make our turn. Ooh, yeah, see, there you go. See, lost a little bit of speed pulling that maneuver a little bit faster than I probably should have. But yeah, for the most part, this has been a lot of fun to fly. This thing works really well and does exactly what I need it to. So, all right, so gear going down. And one of the reasons I found out that one of the things that I have that's very different than the real X-15 is the real X-15 had a big, thick chonker of a wedge tail, and that was there to help it have better hypersonic stability. So it probably, if I had designed it in the way that the real X-15 was designed, I would probably not wobble so darn much, but I also probably wouldn't be able to glide as well because it created a tremendous amount of drag. Alright, so there's the parachute out, and I am actually really low. I probably could have landed this on wheels, but I am a coward. Whoa, holy crap. Okay, and alright. Wow, that was a little dicey, but we made it. We are back home safe once again. Congratulations on a successful flight, another 33,000 funds, very nice. But yeah, the reason why we are almost out of those is because the next technology we have is basic capsules, so we are just about there. We are just about at the point where I am going to start saving my money to begin development of our first crewed capsule. And we are going to be, that's going to cost quite a bit in unlocking fees, but it's also going to cost us in flying some tests, because unlike all of these probes that I am happy to let tear themselves apart on launch and not test the engines and whatever, we are going to take very good care of our first astronaut, which actually it looks like Johnny Flores might continue his career into being our first capsule pilot. But we want to make sure that we have everything in place to make those first flights very safe, because I don't want to be testing things, without knowing that they're going to work. And I'm not talking about just doing simulations. But even with the technologies, I want to make sure that I know what to do as far as design and construction of the rockets and so forth. So we're going to follow the historical path where we're going to fly a couple of suborbital missions to test out and prove the technologies that we have before we move on to orbital flights. Not necessarily because I think they're necessary. I'm not sure that there's anything that we're going to get from a suborbital flight on a capsule that we couldn't get by just going straight to orbital. But I really like the idea of following that historical trajectory a little bit more than perhaps we need to. Like I said, for my own benefit of making sure I understand how all of this stuff works. And we are 100% sending up our first Mercury command pod unmanned. Alright, so it looks like we are going to need 240,000 funds to unlock this whole node. I'm willing to bet that the 80,000 for the Mercury and the Mark 1 pod are shared costs, so that's not actually going to cost us that much. And we're not going to spend the money on the Vostok. We are pretty firmly committed to the American path at this point. But yeah, it looks like there's a whole bundle of different things like you might see from the FASA mod pack, where you have all the individual bits that were used in various on various launch vehicles. and all the individual fiddly things like the RCS roll thrusters that you put up on top of the command pod and all that. And of course, they also have the Mark 1 pod, so you can kind of roll your own. But yeah, that's going to cost us a little bit of money that I don't necessarily have to spend just yet. So thankfully, we have a couple of very big missions coming up very, very soon. And while we are working on that, I can actually send Johnny Flores to school on proficiency for the Mercury, which is going to take him the better part of a year. Let's go ahead and put that on the calendar. And we should really think about hiring another astronaut or two. I, again, am not sure I have the money for that, but once we get our next big payout, I think that is something that we should do. Alright, so I said I was going to wait on hiring a new astronaut, but I have been kind of checking on my along my time warp to the next launch, and I could not help but be impressed by the astounding candidate Valerie Dunn, who is nearly maxed out on courage and does not have a meter full of stupidity. So I have the bell curve and don't insult me options checked on Kerbal Renamer, which is theoretically supposed to, you know, give you an even distribution of stats, but also don't give you a bunch of really stupid Kerbals. Which I think is a great thing, especially for this RP-1 playthrough. Like, I mean, in stock, I guess it's fine that they have a meter for stupidity that is often very high and whatever. It doesn't actually matter, but it matters a little bit in RP-1. There are some things that are tied to those stats. But even with this checked, I'm still getting some very, very stupid candidates. Got some folks up here that are like nearly maxed out, and that's just not great. I believe the stupidity meter is tied to training times for as little as that actually matters. And courage, I think, involves their maximum sustainable G-forces and their general G-force tolerance, I think. Yeah, because this is somebody with a very low number has well, they're an engineer, so that's not 1-to-1. But yeah, their G-force endurance is 2.21x compared to 1.64x. Okay, so maybe I have no idea what the difference is. But I'm pretty sure that the stupidity is tied to the training time for their courses and so forth. Also, I love having a female astronaut in our first class of Mercury astronauts, and I think that will be a very good. And also, I really like her stats, so I think that will be a very good match. So let's go ahead and enlist. And there, she is locked in till 1973, so she is going to be one of our first astronaut class. All right, so now that she's hired, let's go ahead and start her in training because she needs all sorts of things. I'm not sure what this general aviation is, but I can't imagine it hurts. So let's go ahead and get her trained in that. Oh, it takes just a day. Okay, so that's done. Let's go ahead and get her trained up on the Mercury capsule as well. Still going to take her 260 days. So yeah, there we go. Now we have our first astronauts training in proficiency in the Mercury capsule. And there we go. We finished up the magnetic scan over Earth with our first equatorial geostationary satellite, which is just lovely. A little bit of extra science is excellent. All right, so while I'm at it, it's time to look up when the next transfer to Mars is going to be. So I'm just finding what the best insertion is based on the default values. Well, I actually can be on with a flyby in mind because we are unlikely to be able to insert into an orbit around Mars at this point. And then we'll just add an alarm, and it looks like we have a couple years to go until that is going to be a viable transfer. We have a decently expensive one that we could do very soon, but that's still pretty pricey as far as the delta V needed. A total ejection delta V of 3,607 meters per second is something that we could theoretically do right now, so I want to be careful about how much I add on top of that because we are unlikely to get the optimal value that this calculator is asking for. So yeah, it seems... if not, well, maybe not likely, but it seems possible that we're going to be able to hit the this Earth-Venus window, which would be really, really cool. I'd love to be able to hit that one and start getting some science from other planets. All right, once again on the pad is another Tela 1 bearing the Returner 2 science return capsule. And it has some of my settings, which is interesting. Some of the settings that I had set before. But yeah, we are looking for a 150 kilometer by 40,000 kilometer orbit. Omitting coast. Want to turn 180 degrees. All right, so that is all looking good. And I do have the contract, right? Yeah, reach orbital speed and return. Okay, so here we go. We are going to engage autopilot and ignite the engines. And we have successful liftoff of a Tela 1 bearing Returner 2 to orbit. Fabulous. Okay, so not much more to say about this one than I think we've already said. This has failed me for the last time. Well, that's not true at all. It has definitely not failed me for the last time. But yeah, we are increasing the data units from test light on these engines, the newest and greatest and latest versions of these, the LR89 and the LR105, which I'm going to definitely be using a bunch of in the future as well. So it's very good that the ignition failure rates are beginning to fall to a level that is not quite so terrifying, that it doesn't feel like I'm rolling the dice quite so much with every single launch. All right, so we got another 5 minutes to orbit, so I will see you then unless something horrible happens. All right, so our final burn is coming to a conclusion, and we have had no issues. I am so thrilled that this has finally worked out. Although it looks like there is a secret failure mode here, which is not checking your staging. Yeah, I was about to fire my retro rocket before with my separation motor, which would have been just fabulous. Okay, so we are in a good orbit. We have a perigee of 150 kilometers and an apogee of 40 kilometers, which, 40,000 kilometers, which is going to put us about 2,500-ish kilometers above geostationary, which means we are also about 2,500-ish above the Earth space high threshold, which means that we are going to be dipping up into that regime for about 4 hours, 2 to 4 hours per orbit, and that is going to get us the science that we need to complete our biological experiments. So we can now, to save power, remove the upper stage, and which just leaves us with the Altair motor. That is what I'm going to use, which is what I'm going to use to deorbit this vessel, and also reduce the speed to a level that the science sample return capsule is able to handle the heat loads. All right, so this should, in theory, be controllable by, I can talk a little bit about the vessel since it hasn't undergone a rapid unplanned disassembly on the way up to orbit. I can actually finally talk about what I have come up with here. So this is still using as a basis for the design, the science sample return capsule, which has some interesting properties. It comes with, if you use the command module up on top here, it's a very long paw. Just shrink some of this stuff down just so that we can see. So anyways, this has 150 kilograms of avionics control, as I've mentioned previously. We are out of data connection, but that's, I think, fine for now. So that gives us a little bit of control. It gives us a decent antenna that we are going to use. I've actually used the Tech Level 2 antenna up here. And that should give us good signal. This also has a parachute built in and also nitrogen gas thrusters that will allow us to point the vessel. So I'm using that because that's all kind of built in and seems to be lower weight for, you know, all of this business at once. Lower weight and cost for a bunch of things that I could do manually. Inside here, we have the capsule itself, and I have just packed away some extra batteries to help this thing last a little bit longer on return and descent. Inside here, we have, well, not inside here, this is actually an avionics, a deep space avionics that I am going to shut down. That controls 520 kilograms. So between the two, that actually unlocks us, because we have this whole stage, this whole probe is 658 kilograms. And with the extra biological sample, which is, I think, is going to generate a 10 kilogram weight. Either it's going to generate 10 kilograms or it's just going to move the 10 kilograms up to the top. One way or the other, it is able to handle that. And still be able to orient the spacecraft towards prograde to deorbit. Inside here, just like on the Returner 1, we have the biological sample capsule, a big battery bank, and then unselectable for some reason is the larger advanced biological sample capsule inside there. So that is what we have shrouded in here, and that is just going to basically stay inside there forever. I don't have any need to take it out. There are, I have to imagine, automated systems that will pull the samples up into the heat shielded capsule up on top. We don't have to think too hard about how or why that works. It just does. And then, as I mentioned, we have an Altair motor, which will deorbit. And yeah, so that is what I have come up with to do our sample return. I have found that the 940 meters per second of delta V to bring us down is absolutely required, and still brings this capsule to the very edge of its capabilities when it is deorbiting, because as you can see, we are up a little bit. We are up to almost 500 kilometers and heading up rapidly to the apogee of our orbit. So we have slowed down slightly, but we are still over 10 kilometers per second. And yeah, that gets real toasty on re-entry and is not too much further from lunar orbital velocity than you'd think. So yeah, that is something that I found to be an incredibly important distinction on how you plan your re-entries. In stock KSP, basically, if you have a heat shield, you're all set, unless you're trying to re-enter from like an interplanetary trajectory or something like that. In RP-1, that is not the case whatsoever. You absolutely need to be very careful with your re-entry profiles to make sure you do not burn up. The latest version of Ferrum Aerospace has come with a rework of re-entry heating and has made it much spicier than it was before, so it's invalidating a lot of older builds and is, I guess it's fair enough because I'm learning this from scratch, so I don't know any better. I just know that it's been very, very challenging to figure out how to re-enter safely. Alright, so now it is time for us to actually perform our mission. So we are just going to be spinning around, and you can see that when we are in low orbit, I have about 9 days of electric charge based on the giant batteries that we have. And when I get up to the level of orbit where I can do my experiment, it brings us down to 5 days. So we are not going to need nearly that much time. We are going to take several orbits, but I think that's going to take a total of like 2.5 days before we complete all of the science that we need on the biological sample 2. So we can open this up and we can see, I think, yeah, it's a little hard to see other like data. Oh, there we go. You can see some of the data that you have. Yeah, it's hard to actually see exactly how much is there and how much is left to go on other biomes science when you're not in that biome. But I feel like it's of limited utility anyways. So we have already completed the regular biological sample. We finished that in the first 20 minutes of our first pass through high orbit, and that's going to get us 28 science, and then this one hopefully will get us about 60 or 40, I suppose. No, wait, that's the space low value. See, I get tricked. Yeah, so 50 science is what we're going to get from the up from space high, and so that is getting pretty close. So we should be coming back with over 80 science, which is just fantastic. That's going to get us about 3 of the new nodes, which is going to give us lots and lots of fun new capabilities. So, all right, let's just move on ahead to when this science finishes. All right, and we have just finished up the science. It took us a little bit, almost 3 days, which is right in the middle of the capability of our battery, so just about perfect. We still have 2 days left of battery power, but we are going to come down on this orbit. Yeah, so that's very good. So we have all that, and all that science is ready to roll. Okay, so what we would like to do now is we need to bring us down. So I am going to just plot a maneuver that pushes us 940 meters per second in the prograde direction along our orbit. There we go. Something like that seems just fine. There we go. And I'm going to play, like, if we have to be careful about where we put it, because we want it fairly close to our periapsis, because I don't want it to bring our perigee too low, because if we go too low, we are also likely to burn up. So yeah, let's start with a 42 kilometer perigee. That should be very spicy, but so the balancing act that we are doing here is we are balancing drag, which will slow us down, with heating. And there's a couple different methods of re-entering that I'll talk a little bit about when we are actually doing it. But the science return capsule has an incredibly high ability to ablate quickly. So it ablates a lot of its 50 units of ablator, and it provides actually a fairly tremendous amount of cooling. So it is able to handle really high spikes of heat, but not for very long. And so what I have found works in the current model is to bring the perigee down very, very low so that it really slams into the atmosphere really hard, heats up really quickly, but then it slows down really quickly, and then is therefore able to survive. So let's see if I end up eating my words here in a minute. Okay, so we are going to transfer our data into that the slots on the science return vessel. Okay, we do have control. I had a brief moment where I was terrified that I didn't actually have control, but everything seems to be fine. So I am going to turn that off, and we are going to just rotate around fairly slowly, because it is not that big of a deal to move a little bit slowly when you are moving around probes. But we do need to kind of get there in time for this burn, but I am trying to save a little bit of my nitrogen thruster fuel. Okay, so we are going to just move that right along. We are holding steady, and 3, 2, 1, deorbit. All right, so this is the Altair X248, which I am really quite enjoying. It is turning out to be a very handy thing, because it is like just a couple hundred kilograms. Like, it's, I want to say 200 kilograms, and I found that for the weight, it is better than packing on more hydrazine and extending out a generic thruster stage. So yeah, I'm really enjoying using that on as an upper stage motor. All right, so we are just coming to the end of this burn, and we have a stop. We have a final perigee of 44 kilometers, which is pretty good. I think that should work. Hopefully we do not burn up. I'm going to do a couple things as we prepare. I want to bring the last of my electric charge home with me. Not that I necessarily think that I'll need it, but because, you know, it feels nice to make sure that I have all that. We have the data packed away, and we are ready to go as far as that's concerned. Once I jettison all of this business, we will still be able to control the upper bit of this module, even with the sample packed away. So let's go ahead and kick that off. There we go. And now all we have is the return capsule and the parachute, and then the extra batteries that I have put on inside. Very nice. So, in the spirit of saving our nitrogen fuel, I'm just going to kick it slightly in the direction of retrograde, and we are just going to let it rotate around slowly. This is a tip that I've heard on the Discord from one of the developers, that, you know, because when it doesn't actually matter how fast you reorient yourself, then why wouldn't you just give it the slightest kick and then rotate around? Like real life spacecraft and satellites take on the order of minutes, tens of minutes sometimes, to reorient themselves, not, you know, within a second like we usually expect things to in Kerbal Space Program. And it's because there's no real reason to be in a hurry. Like, we've, you know, just spent the time chatting and slowly reorienting ourselves, and now we are just about there and still well above the atmosphere. So now let's just turn on smartass so that we can make sure that we are pointed down the surface velocity vector, and now we can kind of come back in. So I've done a little bit of testing with this vessel as it compares to other re-entry capsules, as we are just about to get into the top level of the atmosphere here. There we go. We are now broken in, and we are descending through the atmosphere of Earth. But yeah, the other heat shields, the generic like standalone heat shields, I found that they have a much lower flux rating. Like, they ablate a little bit slower, which tells me that they are more suited to a long, slow coast through the upper atmosphere, as opposed to this like slamming on the brakes that I'm doing with this particular capsule. I'm not sure if that's necessarily intended from a gameplay perspective. I've heard that the heat shield variants, or the heat shield configurations, are not necessarily. I've heard that the heat shield variants are not necessarily configured all in the exact same way, which is fine, but it just means that you have to be careful about how you use things. All right, so this is something that I wish I'd done when I dropped in my first on the Returner 1 craft, where I watch the ablator ablate away. And it is going to be, if based on my tests of doing a mission that was very similar to this one, it is going to be very, very close. But I'm hoping that our low perigee is going to get us through. And you see that it is ablating away incredibly quickly. And I wish I could see like what the temperature was. Like, not just a scale of like, oh, this is really hot. Like, I want to see what the Kelvin numbers are. I'm sure there's an option that I could find on that, but I'm not too stressed about it at the moment because it's not super necessary to see. There we go. We have brought our apogee down. We are coming down pretty quickly. Our speed is dropping below 8 kilometers per second, and you can see that the ablator is beginning to ablate a little less quickly, but it's still coming down pretty darn precipitously. The nitrogen thrusters are burning to keep us along our retrograde vector. Speed below 7 kilometers per second. 6,500. 10 units remain. Our G-forces are increasing as we get into the thickest part of the atmosphere. 6 units. 5. Oh my gosh. 4 units. Oh, I don't know if this is going to survive. Oh, it's slowing down, but it's so low, and I'm worried that as soon as that runs out, it's just going to pop. Oh my gosh. 3.5 kilometers per second. 3 kilometers. 2.5. I think we might have done it. Oh my gosh, could I have cut that any closer? Holy crap. Ooh. Yeah, so from what little I know, and please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but from what little I know about how the ablator module works, from a design perspective, is that when there is still a ablator and the ablator is being reduced, or when there is still a ablator, when the temperature of the skin rises to a certain temperature, it begins to basically reduce the amount of ablator based on what the temperature is over the regular allowable temperature. And so it will begin to ablate away to cool down the vessel so that there is reduction in that skim temperature. And then as you continue through the atmosphere, the temperature rises and then it is cooled by the reducing ablator. And the amount of ablator that you use is proportional to your temperature. So the hotter the temperature, the faster that ablator is going to melt away based on some factor that is probably hard coded of how much it can ablate at any given time, because there is absolutely a certain speed that you can reach where it will just overheat and explode regardless of still having a ablator. But when there is a ablator in the module, when there is still a ablator left, there is a different maximum temperature than when the ablator is gone. And so when that ablator is completely empty and it is finished that up and it is done ablating, then that new maximum skin temperature will take effect, and I have found that is the point where it just instantly explodes and there's nothing left. Like, it just melts instantly as soon as the ablator is completely gone, even if it was something that it was surviving okay just a moment before, which makes sense. So that would be something like you're screaming through the atmosphere and you still have ablator on the bottom, and then ablation is literally stripping away. Like, it's like literally melting the tiles on the bottom of the heat shield, and then it dissolves and evaporates in the plasma stream, which will reduce temperature. So that phase change reduces temperature. And when that's not there anymore, I imagine that's something like just ripping a literal hole in the bottom structure of the heat shield that held the ablator in place, right? So once the ablator is gone, you are no longer protected, and then that's it, game over. And that is something that has happened to this capsule on tests way more times than I can count, but I've found that it works best when you do a screaming hot dive into the low atmosphere to just like hit that brick wall of drag and slow down quickly, and I guess that worked out. With 0.5 units of ablator remaining, we are descending on a parachute into the ocean. Looks like it's in the middle of the ocean, on our way over towards Africa. Sploosh! And we have splashdown of our Returner 2 capsule full of frogs, I think. Probably frogs. That has now splashed down after their several orbits around Earth. Engineers are examining the spacecraft very keenly indeed, as well as scientists, to determine what effects the orbital environment had on those frogs. And we got a big chunk of money too, which is great. All right, and on return, we have recovered 78 science, and between that and everything else that we have, like we're getting a little bit of recovery data just from the vessel itself, the contract, and everything else, we have almost 100 science. Fabulous, fantastic, I'm so excited. Let's see. Man, there's so many things that I want now. We've already got interplanetary communications researching, which is great. We should also probably do interplanetary probes, right? Because that will reduce the mass of our science cores and reduce their power consumption, and reduce the power consumption of everything. Yeah, reducing mass and power consumption for our deep space probes is a very important thing that I think will be critical. We should also get, let's definitely do this. This is going to get us some new science experiments, which is going to open up the ability to get more science without necessarily having to go interplanetary. Although I do want to do that as well. But we now have, we will have infrared radiometers and orbital perturbation experiments, which should be exciting things. I would also love to get better solar panels. Yep. So that's going to get us hinged solar panels, which means I'm going to be even better about putting a single set of solar panels in one orientation as opposed to kind of putting solar panels on every available surface like I have been. That leaves us with 47 points, and I don't necessarily want all probes and power, although RTGs are very exciting and interesting idea. Yeah, so now we have to decide if we want to go with 1961 orbital rocketry. I think maybe we do. I think it's time that we upgrade our engines one more time. That's going to get us an Agena upgrade, which is pretty darn exciting. And it's going to get us the H1 and H1C engines, which are basically right along our critical upgrade path, in that it is a model upgrade for the LR-79. It is used on the Saturn I and also the Delta rockets, which is very exciting and right on our critical core path, which is a really fun thing because that's kind of what everything is now on this line. Because the Soviet engines kind of finally split off and do their own thing down in staged combustion, because that is the big breakthrough that the Soviets had, which was making closed cycle staged combustion engines, and they went all in on that path, and so much so that it now represents a fully separate branch of research that is on its own, and we can just ignore instead of ignoring them in our nodes up here. There is still going to be some shared rocket engines down the main path, because this is just orbital rocketry. This is kind of everything. But the American path is up here in prototype hydrolox. So that's using liquid hydrogen and oxygen to propel engines, and that is a very interesting, very cool, and very efficient type of propulsion that requires cryogenic cooling in space, which poses its own set of problems. But anyways, I think what I would like is to get grab this 1961 orbital rocketry node to make sure that our propulsion technology is keeping up with our probes, because we need everything, but that is something that I think will be a nice capstone to all of the things that we have researched. We could also jump ahead to 1962, 1963 solid rocket engines and get a better Altair, which is kind of an interesting idea. And also this mysterious solid engine real fuels technology upgrade. And I have no idea what that means, but it sounds very exciting and costs just a little bit of funds. So yeah, let's grab that and keep going in on this solid rocket path that we have been on. All right, but with all those technology upgrades and planning for the future, I think that is going to do it for this episode. We had a pretty busy set of launches where we did some things that we've been planning to do for a long time. We finally got a satellite up in a geostationary orbit, and we also got we returned space from high orbit and showed that you do indeed need to bring those heat shields a little bit into a lower orbit before you try to return them, because otherwise they will melt straight through. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, leave me a comment, let me know what you thought in the comments down below, and I will see you next time.